Okay, so we are starting chapter 20. This is the final chapter of um it's the final chapter of this section of uh Kavanah. It's not that, the later chapters talk about something else, so we're going to be wrapping up the discussion that started in chapter 30. They are very long chapters. Chapter 40 itself is um a little bit shorter because it has a lot of notes, and we're not going to necessarily do all the notes. Very, very involved, very in-depth notes, but that's how it goes. Okay, so I'm just trying to get this to work over here to upload photos. It's not working. So let's go. Let's give you a preface. Let's give you a preface over here. Um, and it goes like this. So we understand we're discussing the need to have intention. We discussed at length in the last chapter the need to have intention. And remember, everybody, what defines intention? What defines kavanah? Intention is when you do a mitzvah, which is powered by your love and awe of God. That is when that is when um, it's a real that's real kavanah. In other words, just knowing the meaning of the prayers or just knowing the meaning of the mitzvah is not enough. You have to actually do the mitzvah with a love and awe of God. And we discussed how when you do that, the prayers elevate to certain worlds and become one with the worlds. And we discussed that at length, and we're going to have to bring that up again. Why? Because this week we're going to discuss a little bit more what happens when you don't have kavanah. Okay, so last week was a lot of when you do have kavanah, though we did discuss what happens when you don't. This week we're going to delve deeper into what happens when you don't. So um, let us remind ourselves. We explained in a previous class, I think 2 or 3 classes ago, that there is what is called the external part of a world and the internal part of a world. But let's first give an example. Everything in this world really has an external and an internal. Okay, as it pertains to a person, the external is probably what you see. Probably even now, this is, the external me. Hopefully, it's some reflection of the internal me, but at the end of the day, it's a external me. If you come over, if you were to be my child or hang out here a lot, you might get a more of an internal me. Okay, and the same thing is anything in this world. We have the internal and the external, and similarly in the world, there is the external. There's what the world is showing to us, and then there is the internal of the world, which is obviously the godly light, the godly energy. So, as it pertains to the spiritual worlds, we said a spiritual world is a world full of lots of different things. It's got angels and it's got area and space, spiritual space, obviously. But the internal workings of the world is the light and the vivifying energy of God. So, um, we're going to say that when you study Torah, do mitzvos, without intention, those mitzvos cannot unify with the oneness of God, and therefore they remain in the external area of the world. That's why we explained. We said when we go to Gan Eden, when we go to heaven, we enjoy the light of our Torah mitzvot. But we said, how does that work? When our Torah mitzvot are powered by love and awe of God, they become one with. Let me just turn my phone off from buzzing over here. They become one with they become one with the energy of that world. And then when we go after we pass away, chas v'shalom, but when we go to that world, we can enjoy the light of God in that world, which is unified with our Torah and our mitzvot. However, we said, and we're saying now, that if you do a mitzvah or you study Torah without any powering energy of love and awe of God, then the mitzvah and the Torah does not become unified with the light of God. It remains stuck in the external part of the world. Now, what's interesting is that he's going to say that though mitzvahs done without any intention remain here in this world, which makes sense, there's no powering energy that allows them to become unified with God above. Nevertheless, he says Torah, even without any intention, does elevate itself to the external world of Yetzirah, which is the second to lowest world of formation. How is it able to elevate itself even though there is no vivifying energy? The answer is going to be because Torah itself is spiritual. In other words, um, as we can understand, a mitzvah is done with a physical object. So the mitzvah is done with a physical object, and it's done without intention. It remains here in the physical world. But Torah, which was to begin with a more spiritual idea, it can be in the more spiritual world, but again, it remains in the external part of the world, which means practically it doesn't really help you. Okay, you cannot enjoy the light and the energy of that mitzvah because you did not allow that mitzvah to unify itself with the light of God. All this being said, we have a second question, okay? So the second question is, what does it even mean? How is it even possible that... Actually, before I get to the second question, I just want to say that this is the meaning. There's a famous statement in the Talmud, and actually there's a singer called Yaakov Shweki made a song out of it. It says, Ashrei mi shebalakan v'talmudo biyado. The story is there was a sage in the Talmud who had a near-death experience, and he went to heaven, and they were saying in heaven, lucky is the one who comes here and he's holding the Talmud in his hand. So the general understanding of that statement is, oh, lucky is someone who studied on this world, so automatically they come to heaven with Torah that they studied. But at a deeper level, the Alter Rebbe is going to say it means much deeper than that. You, in other words, even if you study Talmud, there's no promise that it'll be in heaven when you get there. So lucky is the man who comes to heaven and the Talmud is in his hand means lucky is someone who studies Torah with feelings of love and awe of God, then he will enjoy the Torah in the world to come. That's the real meaning of Asher Mishabalakan v'Talmudo biyado. In fact, there's a story, the Alter Rebbe, which by the way is very important. Today is a very special day to be studying Tanya because today is actually the yahrzeit, the anniversary of the passing of the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya. So today is the yahrzeit of Tanya, so it's very special that we are actually learning the Tanya today on the day of his yahrzeit. Very, very special day. Chavdal Tevis, 24th of Tevis. In the year 1812, I think. I could be wrong here. You'll have to look it up. Anyways, I'm sure you could just Google it and it'll come up. So, um, so the Alter Rebbe was one. We know he went to jail, and there was someone who was very instrumental in getting him out of prison. And when he got out, the guy who was instrumental in getting him out of prison said, "I want you though to do me a favor, meet some of the great not Hasidic teachers and rabbis of the day." So he met with one of them, and this great teacher, his name was Rabbi Yeshua Zeitlin. He asked Alter Rebbe, he said, "I want to understand what you're writing in the Tanya in chapter 40, which we're studying here today. How can you say, what's your source that if someone doesn't study with feelings of love and awe of God, that um, it doesn't go heavenward?" And he answered him. He said, it says in the Talmud somewhere. It says in one verse, it says your greatness goes. Sorry, your kindness goes until the heavens, and in another place it says your kindness goes above the heavens. And the Talmud says, how is it possible? Is kindness only in this world, or is it in the world, or is it also in the heavens? And the Talmud answers, here, when it only goes until the heavens, is when you do a mitzvah without intention. And here, when it goes above the heavens, is when you do a mitzvah with intention. And so it's a clear source from the Talmud that if you do a mitzvah without intention, it's stuck here in this world, in the external element of this world. But when you do a mitzvah with intention, it can go up to places that are above the world. Okay, so let us now read inside. Okay, so now that we have this preface, we have the external and internal worlds. We understand Torah can elevate to a higher world, but it's still stuck in the external place of the world, meaning it doesn't unify with the light of God. Mitzvahs are stuck down here, and they don't get unified with the light of God here. So all in all, you understand it's a good idea to study and do Torah with intention. Now, to answer the question we discussed last week, what does that mean? Every single moment I'm inspired. The answer is you start off your day right, and then throughout the day, that inspiration carries you. So let's read over here. The power of Kavanah, number 3. So, As long as you haven't, okay, so at the end of chapter 39, we learn when Torah study is carried out without kavanah, it won't ascend to the spiritual worlds until you study the text again with kavanah, with intention. Now he continues. But as long as you haven't gone back and studied this Torah text with authentic intent, your study won't rise up even to the 10 sfirot that illuminate the world of Yetzirah or Asiyah. Meaning the 10 sfirot are, as we said, the energy of the world, the godly energy of the world. That's the internal part of the world. And if you study without any feelings towards God, it will not uh, be able to unite with the energy of God in that world. Rather, it'll be stuck in the chambers of the world. Why? As he continues, be in the black and the bold part, because the Sphirot are divine, and the blessed infinite light is literally merged and enmeshed with them. Okay? If your intent is not for the sake of the divine, your Torah can't merge with the divine energy of the Sphirot, even in the lowest world. As we learned previously, the requirement for this authentic divine intent is stated in the Tikkun Zohar. So his point is, your Torah cannot merge with the intent. And as he continues, and as the Zohar states, without reverence and love for God, the Torah can't rise up and stand before God. So I gave you earlier a proof from the Talmud, and the Zohar says it clearly that Torah without reverence and love can't rise up and stand before God. And what we're explaining, what does that mean? It means it cannot become unified with the divine energy. Now he explains, but when your Torah study can't rise up and stand before God, where exactly does its energy go? We're not talking about the case mentioned in the previous chapter where the Torah becomes bound by the klipa due to selfish intention. We're talking about when the intention was neutral. Okay? So rather, with neutral intent, your study will ascend not to the divine sphirot, but to the chambers and repositories in those worlds, which are the superficial dimension of the worlds. So by the way, if you're a minimalist and you don't like clutter, you're not going to want to do this, because now you're going to be cluttering up the worlds. You're going to be depositing all over the worlds mitzvahs that are stuck there instead of becoming unified with the energy. The superficial dimension of the world and its infrastructure, those elements which are there to support the main content of the world, which is divine. By the way, if you think about it, if most of us do our mitzvahs to be connected to God, if that's our purpose and goal, which is often what we want to do, right? Everybody's been to a Chabad class where we say mitzvah means tzavtzav v'chibur, mitzvah means connection. Then if you really want that connection, you're definitely going to want to do a mitzvah with feelings towards God to get the full benefit of connection. Right? Otherwise, it's stuck in the repositories of the world. Now it continues. And it's there in a superficial dimension of the worlds that the angels are stationed. So the angels are hanging out there. Even though the angels are holy, since they are not the purpose of the world which contains them, they are considered superficial. So angels are, remember, the worlds are really for us. The angels they happen to enjoy some of it. As stated by Rabbi Chaim Vital of blessed memory in chapter 2, that from Torah study without authentic intent, angels are created in the world of Yetzirah. Oops. And that's not working out for me. Let's try one more time. Okay, there. And from the practical mitzvahs observed without intent, the angels are created in the lower world of Asiyah, the mitzvahs involving action, when devoid of kavanah, have little energy, little light and energy, don't, so they cannot rise to the Yetzirah. As noted above, the angels inhabit the superficial dimension of each world. So Reb Chaim Vital's statement that the Torah study without authentic intent creates angels indicates that the Torah rises to the superficial dimension of the world and not to the Sefirot. Again, I have to say this many times. You have to remember that the Tanya is written both for the scholar and the layperson. So the scholar, he's answering a question to the scholar here. The scholar might read this statement of Rabbi Chaim Vital, who was the prime student of the Arizal, the holy Ari HaKadosh, the holy Kabbalist in Safed, and he might be reading his statement, oh, when you do mitzvahs without intent, you're creating angels. You might think it's a positive. He's telling you, no, it's a negative, because angels mean external. Whereas if you do mitzvahs with intent, they become unified with the world, unified with the divine light, as noted above. So, okay. But we see that Torah study or mitzvahs, or a mitzvah devoid of kavanah, does at least enjoy some level of spiritual ascent, and it rises to the level of angels. It turns out then that the Tikkun Zohar is teaching that worship devoid of kavanah can't rise up and stand before God doesn't mean the worship can't rise at all. It just can't rise to the Sfirot, and thereby to the Blessed Infinite One, but it can rise at least to the superficial dimension of Asiyah, in the case of mitzvah yitzirah. So, by the way, that is helpful to anybody who says, well, if I don't have intention, I shouldn't do it. It is beneficial. Number one, it does get to some spiritual level. And number two, as we mentioned in the last class, you have the ability to elevate it as well. Now, he's going to continue an interesting point about angels over here. And for those of you who are fascinated about angels, this is an important point. So, before we talk about angels, any questions or comments? Any questions or comments? Or is it all clear? And no? We're following so far. The basic point is, if you do a mitzvah without intention, the mitzvah and the Torah is stuck in the external part of the world, not in the internal part of the world. Yes, Beth, you want to say something? No? Okay,
No, just listening.
got it. Okay. So before we start about the malachim, I want to introduce you to a word chomer and surah. Chomer and surah means chomer is matter, surah means form. And everything that exists in this world has form and matter. I think Einstein talks about it, right? Am I correct about that? For the scientists here? Um, Anybody wants to get or does he call it energy and equals mc squared? No? Anybody wants to jump in over here? Help me over here. Right? Energy can't be destroyed or something. I don't know. I didn't study this stuff depth. But anyways, if anybody wants to jump in, you can. But the point is that everything has a matter and a form, otherwise known as body and soul. There's different ways of talking about it. Now, the question is, does that concept apply to spiritual elements? In other words, we understand everything in this world has matter and has a soul or a form. Do spiritual beings have matter and soul? And the answer is yes, it does. And let's read what he says here. So it's an interesting point. Let's read what he says here. That angels have matter and form. So he says here, and good to see Reb Chunya. Okay, so it says here, angels are of course entirely spiritual, and they don't possess physical bodies. Sorry, and all angels consist of both matter and form, and therefore they are incompatible with the spherot which are divine. So, in order to become one with the spherot, with the divine emanations of God, you have to have only form, only soul, not matter. Now, the question is, of course, how do angels have form if they're spiritual? So he explains. Angels are, of course, entirely spiritual and they don't possess a physical body, but they are a complex amalgam, love that word, of different energies, not all of which are equally devoted to God. That's why the angels constantly sing and bow to God in an effort to subdue the part of them which is less inclined to worship. Their less inclined component is what the mystics refer to as the angels' matter. Maimonides, in fact, talks about how everything in this world is made up of four base elements: wind, fire, water, and earth. And angels are more spiritual, but they are made up of two components of wind and fire. Again, we're talking about very spiritual concepts. The point is a fascinating idea that that the angels have matter. The angels have some form of matter, meaning they're not entirely identified with soul. The Tanya, which is, by the way, going back to a previous class, we said that angels cannot be in the world of Atzilut because they have some identity. Only certain righteous people can go to the world of Atzilut because they have no identity. It's an interesting point. That's the matter that gets in the way. So again, if anybody's interested in angels, here we have a little bit more. The Tanya refers here to this concept of angelic matter and form to add clarity to the idea of a neutral intent. Lacking intention doesn't mean that your act was totally mindless. It means, for example, that you studied Torah, prayed, and understood the meaning of the words you were saying, but your intention wasn't to connect to God. So again, we're repeating this idea again and again. That's why even the angel created by such a worship has matter and form. Matter corresponding to the physical enunciation of the words, and the form corresponding to the basic understanding of what you're doing. So even a mitzvah that you do without intention to connect to God does have a form, it does have a soul. What is the soul? The soul is the understanding of what you're doing, but it's still not entirely identified with soul, which is why it does not become one with the worlds. Oh, sorry, with the Sphirot. All right, so now he's going to pause. He's going to say, all right, this is all discussing, this is all discussing Torah with, uh, this is all discussing if I did a mitzvah or Torah, I didn't do it for anything wrong. I just did it out of habit. I did it because my Chabad rabbi is pressuring me. I don't know. I'm doing it out of it's not selfish. I'm just not doing it for God per se, okay? So in that case, you do create some spiritual angels, something in the external worlds of God. It doesn't unite with God, but it's still there. But now he's going to say, but what happens if you study Torah for purely selfish motives? That's what he says. But the Torah which is studied with a completely inauthentic intent. Oops. Let's try that one more time. Such as to be celebrated as a Torah scholar. Sim simply doesn't ascend heavenward at all, even to the chambers and repositories of the sacred angels. Rather, the Torah remains below in this physical world, which is a repository of the klipot. So, as we explained last time, when you do a mitzvah without intention, it's not enmeshed with the unclean forces, it's not exiled, it's just not elevated. And so later you can elevate it easily. But we said last time, if you do it with selfish intentions, like to be called a Torah scholar, then that selfishness is holding back the mitzvah. And the only way to redeem that mitzvah or to redeem that Torah is to do a big teshuvah, big repentance. Now it continues. The Tikkun Zohar statement that Torah without intention can't rise up and stand before God can mean two different things in different circumstances. If there is a neutral intention, then the Torah will rise. It just won't rise before God. But if it is selfish intent, then the Torah won't rise at all and will become stuck in the world of Klippa. The Tanya now bring two sources that support the idea that Torah performed with selfish intent does not rise from the world. As he continues, as the Zohar states, commenting on the verse, what gain is there for man in all the toil that he does under the sun? So that is a statement for King Solomon. King Solomon says, what do we gain from all this work we do? You know, if you read King Solomon, Ecclesiastes, he's basically just fed up with life. You know, you ever heard anybody that's fed up with life? I've done everything, I've accomplished, I've been successful, I've done this, and it doesn't mean anything, right? This is basically the beginning of, you read King Solomon, a very simple level. But obviously, every statement in the Tanakh has a deeper layer. The deeper layer here is when it says, what is the use of all the toil that man does under the sky? It's interesting, it says under the sky. It's an interesting way of describing it. So he explains, we know that hard work can refer to physical labor, but it can also refer to studying Torah in depth, which is hard work. Okay? And for those of you who joined our daily Torah study, you can see that. And he continues, that toil without gain, which reminds me, I forgot to post on the daily Torah study, the section for today. It says, that toil without gain includes even toiling in Torah. If he does it for the sake to bring honor to himself, it will remain under the sun. It will not ascend heavenward. So if you work on this earth, but you're toiling for yourself, then what use is all that hard work? So let's say you're someone who sits and studies Torah at depth, and you get to the depth, but it's all for selfish purposes. King Solomon says, what's the point? That Torah is stuck here with your selfish motives. That's holding it back. And this explains the saying of our sages, happy is he who comes here with his learning all in his hand, meaning he should be happy that his Torah rose heavenward and did not remain down here in this world. Okay. So that is the part number one. Part number one, we established if you study Torah, I was referring to Einstein, E equals mc squared, but I was hoping for more explanation there, if it means matter and form. But anyways, um, section two is going to go like this. Okay, so let's recap. We basically repeated a lot what we said before, but a little bit more in depth. Where in essence, when you do a mitzvah without intention, it remains in the external part of the world. It has some spirituality to it, but it's not enough to become united with the light of God. If you study Torah, it goes to a higher world, but also remains in the external part of the world, cannot become one with God. And if you study Torah with selfish intentions, it's held down by the klipot. The question is, how is it possible for us to take Torah and not allow it to become one with God? Because Torah is God's Torah. How can I how can I ruin God's Torah? Torah is God's Torah. I'm just a guest for God's Torah in my mind, right? When I study Torah, the Torah existed before I studied it, okay? So we're learning the Tanya now. The Tanya existed before we studied it. And so how can I take that Torah and now force it into the external part of the world? Seemingly, Torah is holy. How can I detract anything from the Torah? Again, it's just a guest in my mind. How do I have that ability to do anything to it? In fact, the I'm not going to bring this example. It's not important. It'll just confuse you. Okay. So the answer is that we have to understand a concept. Yes, Bonnie?
The walking encyclopedia.
No? Okay, so the answer is we have to understand a concept called tzimtzum. I'm sure many of you here have heard of the word tzimtzum. We've discussed it before. So let us explain. Um, let us explain. It's a general question. We have a very special guest here, Rav Chunya, today, and he always likes to ask, it's all godly. If it's all godly, right? It's a common question. If everything is all godly, how is there any differentiation between anything else, right? How do we differentiate between one thing and the other, right? Everything is godly. God is everywhere. So we're asking that question at a deeper point. Here we're talking about Torah. Torah is definitely godly. How is it possible that I can take the Torah, study it, and banish it to an external place of the world? And the answer is going to be tzimtzum, meaning
Contraction.
yeah, tzimtzum means contraction, right? But tzimtzum is a catch-all word. Tzimtzum means contraction, but there are many, many different ways that we can dilute or hide a light. Contraction is one way. There's also changing a color. For example, if you shine light through right. So in other words, let's give an example. I can shine light, right? I have a right. The sun is everywhere, but then in my house there's a lot less sun because it has to come through a window. Okay, so that is contracting the light, meaning less light. But then you can also contract light through changing it, kind of. For example, if you have colored windows, you've now changed the quality of that light. So there's all different forms of tzimtzum, all different forms and ways that we can uh, take a godly light and hide it. Okay, so we're going to bring an example from two things that will help us understand that Torah, so to speak, basically we're going to say like this. One form of contraction can apply to Torah, and another form of contraction cannot apply to Torah. One form of tzimtzum, one form of hiding God's face can apply to Torah, and one form of tzimtzum, hiding God's face, cannot apply to God's Torah. So let us explain. Um, every single world, all the spiritual worlds, right? You start from the world of Atzilut, then you go down to the world of emanation, then you go down to the world of Bria, creation, then you go down to the world of Yetzirah, the world of formation, then you get down to our world. Every subsequent world has less divine energy, okay? So that is tzimtzum as it means contraction, okay? That's like smaller windows and smaller windows and smaller windows. There is less light, okay? So there's less light. But there is another form of contraction where how hidden the actual light that is there is. I'll say that again. How hidden the actual light that is there is. In other words, even once you have the small window, right, I can actually still see the light of the window. Okay, so even if you're going to tell me, well, the big spiritual world is like someone who's got, a big Florida home with big glass windows, the world of Atzilut. And the world of Bria is like someone who has a little pyroscope or something, that lets in a little bit of light. But at the end of the day, that light is shining, right? I can still see that light. Well, that's why there's another form of tzimtzum, where even the light that you have is hidden. You're not even going to see it. Okay? You're not even going to see it. It's going to be hidden, and we can see that in our world. We live in a world where obviously there has to be a divine energy giving it light. Surely it's more contracted. It's less of an energy. We have smaller windows, okay, than the more spiritual worlds. But on top of that, even the divine energy that's in this world, people don't even realize it's divine energy. We have scientists that spend all their day trying to explain this energy while explaining away that it's not divine energy because God has managed not only to contract his light, but to hide his light so that even when the light is present, we don't recognize that it's God's light. That is why there's an ability for atheists. Okay, the ability for there to be an atheist is because God has taken his light and not only contracted it, but he has also hidden it. Okay? And what we're going to say that this world in general is a world in which we have both forms of contraction, both contraction of the light, less light, and hiding the light. However, Torah has only one of those, but not both of those. Meaning, well, let's read it inside. Let's read it inside. So let's go back inside. Let's go back inside. He says like this. He says, even though the Torah and God are totally one, since God is one with his will, how could any act of Torah not be able to ascend heavenward? If the Torah is the undiluted will of God, even after its descent into this world, shouldn't it rise up and stand before God even without your kavanah? So now I think you're getting the answer. Yes, Torah is the undiluted will of God, meaning there's no contraction in Torah. But you can't have the other form of tzimtzum where you're hiding the light. Okay, so just as in this world, we have both a contracted and a hidden light. Torah doesn't contract, but it can be hidden. So let's continue. The matter is not so simple since the Holy One also pervades all the worlds equally. And nevertheless, the worlds are not equal in level. In other words, if God is everywhere, but the worlds are not equal, what's going on? The difference arises as a result of the recipient. So that's another important point to say. Even when we say that God contracts his light, God hides his light, it's important to note that all these contractions and hiddenness are only from our perspective, not from God's perspective. Okay? The whole symptom, the whole hiding and contracting God's light is not from God. God does not feel like he's hidden anything. Okay? But from our perspective, it's hidden. A great example is, we've touched on this topic, but it's always good to go over. A great example is if I am teaching someone else, okay, and I have to dumb down the topic. Now, the student only hears the dumbed down explanation, and so they're kind of stuck with a dumbed down explanation. To me, the dumbed down explanation doesn't take away from the grand idea, right? I'm still seeing the entire grand idea in the dumbed down explanation. But to the recipient in the class, they only receive and see the dumbed down explanation. But because I see the whole thing and perceive the whole thing, to me, there's nothing hidden. But to the student, they are getting only the hidden part. Another example that's given in Chassidus is like a turtle. It says that for the turtle, the shell and the turtle are one. And I don't know, it's probably different turtles, okay? But for the turtle and the shell are one. So the turtle doesn't feel like the shell is not a part of it. But to us, shell separates between us and the turtle. It's just an interesting physical example. But again, the spiritual example is when I'm explaining something to someone else, I see the entire idea, even in the dumbed down explanation. And maybe I should find a nicer words than saying dumbed down. But let's continue. Your Torah study or mitzvah takes place in this world, i.e., in a place where the Torah's identity, as the undiluted will of God, is not manifest. Okay, so the undiluted will of God is there, but it's not manifest, meaning it's hidden. Okay, so it's not contracted, but it's hidden. Like the word manifest, it's good. So in order to break free from the reality and ascend to the higher worlds where God's presence is evident, it needs the boost of your kavanah, of your intention. Your kavanah, your intention, has the power because it takes place in the setting of this physical world where you and your mind are stationed. Despite the lie which the physical world wants to tell us that God is not present and the Torah is not his undiluted will, kavanah pierces that illusion and neutralizes it. In other words, when I say that I'm going to study to connect with God, then I have pierced the curtain that is hiding God's light because I've said, no, God does exist here. I am studying Torah for God. God is vivifying everything. That pierces that illusion, and so that's what allows that Torah to connect with God, to be revealed. In other words, that the Torah should have revealed in it that it is indeed the undiluted will of God. But if I'm going to, for example, study Torah without any intention, then I haven't pierced the curtain of this world. Or even worse, if I study Torah for selfish reasons, I definitely have not pierced the curtain of this world. Let's continue. From God's perspective, that illusion never existed, and the Torah you study is always one with him. But from our perspective, unless there is kavanah, then your Torah can't rise to God because it's still trapped by the illusion of the world. Love how it's a great, great way to explain it. There's the illusion of the world. That's what's hiding everything, and we need to simplified explanation. Thank you. So we need to, through our intention, we are piercing the delusion of the world. As we discussed in chapter 38, the divine light that shines in various different worlds in two respects. The first is that the upper worlds are capable of receiving infinitely greater illumination than the lower worlds, i.e., there's less symptom diminishment or contraction, right? The windows are larger of the light in the upper worlds. And second is that the upper worlds receive God's light without as many filters and veils as the lower worlds, or I said curtains, okay? Filters, veils, i.e., there's less Hester Panim reduction in quality. So that's another way to put it: quantity and quality of the light, okay? The illusion that and again, it's an illusion because it's not really real. As we discussed in chapter 38, Simtsum is looking at someone's illuminated face through a small aperture. It's the same image but doesn't shine as brightly. That's why you get, cameras with larger apertures. Hester Panim is looking at someone's face through a partially opaque filter, which alters and distorts the image itself. So if you could take your phone, you have any of those filters on your phone, that could change how faces look. That's a good example of, Hester Panim. The divine light and energy entering all the worlds suffers from both Hester Panim and Tzimtzum, meaning it is both contracted quantity, that's the Tzimtzum, and it's also contracted quality, the curtain, the Hester Panim, hiding the face. But in each world, these forces operate to different extents. And this world is the most inferior world of all in both of these two respects. Both in quality, Hester Panim, and in Tzimtzum, quantity. First, because the light found within it suffers from Tzimtzum to the absolute extreme. Okay, we have the most extreme, we have the least amount of light. I think the Kabbalists explain, I'm talking about little windows, okay? The Kabbalists explain, imagine you have a giant curtain and there's one little hole in the curtain. Little pinhole. That's the light that gets to this world, okay? Which is why this world is material and physical. In this world, the divine light and energy have been diminished so much that you can't even see it. That's why this world is material and physical. In other words, it's not only physical, it's material. And second, even this diminished light is additionally obscured by many filters and veils. So you would say, at least the little light I got is a little bit of the truth. No, even that little light that comes to that little pinhole in that curtain, that little light is also filtered. Now you might say, if it's so little light, but then we have nothing. Don't forget, we're talking about contracting God's light. God's light is so powerful that even when a little bit comes through a curtain, it's still powerful. That's why you still need the filters and veils. To the extent that the light is able to become enmeshed in the forces of Klipas Noga. In other words, this world, we have so many filters and veils and God's light that reaches this world that you can even take God's Torah and enmesh it with the Klipa, the unclean forces, providing energy for all the ritually pure things in this world. And included in them is the animal soul, which powers speaking in man. So animals, right? Animals are also klipat noga. Klipas noga is not the worst klipa, that's the neutral klipa. So because of all the filters and veils, it gives energy to all the ritually pure things in this world. So animals are vivified by God's light. And that is only possible because we have both contraction and filters and veils. Just to explain, by the way, a little bit more, why do you need filters and veils? If you think about it, just think about the example of light, okay? How do you get from light? Okay, now when we say God is light, God is obviously not light, okay? He's something much more than light. If you want this great book by Rabbi Emanuel Shochet explaining why we refer to God as light, because there's many similarities, but obviously God is not light. But if I take light and I keep contracting the amount of light that there is, I'm never going to create anything physical, right? Everyone understands that. So the same thing is, how do we get from God's light to physical beings, right? How do we get cows from God's light? Okay, where's the connection, right? Just like physical light. If I contract physical light, how am I going to make cows? I'm not, okay? Now, obviously, I'm not God's light, but it's the same question. How do I take from God's light and make cows? Okay, even if cows are kosher, how do I get the cows? The answer is that we need to not only contract the light, we need to also change the quality of the light. That's the veils and the different veils and curtains and filters, all those different things allow even the changing of how that light looks to create something that seems physical. So now he's going back to his point, and he's coming to answer his question, which is how is it possible that Torah, which is the undiluted will of God, can can I, pull it down so much through my selfish motives? And his answer is because the undiluted will of God is true. It's always undiluted. In other words, it's not like this world where it's contracted light. It's God's undiluted will. But at the same time, there is a curtain on it. And when you study it with ulterior motives, you're pulling it behind the curtain of this world. And he says, and therefore, when you speak words of Torah or prayer without intent, even though the letters are sacred and the energizing animal soul's klipat noga cannot in any way place a veil of separation, okay, because it's God's undiluted will, to impose hester and hide the sanctity found in those letters, nevertheless, the amount of God's light which shines in this world through these words of Torah spoken without intent is extremely diminished due to the tzimtzum effect in this world. So that's a side point he's pointing out here. Option is okay. Let's continue. All right, let's see. But when an act, okay, in chapter 30, we were first introduced to the fundamental principle that Hester, Panim, and Tzimtzum work independently of each other, meaning contraction, which is quantity, and Hester, Panim, which is quality. They work independently. In our case, the fact that the Torah and God are one means the Torah suffers from no Hester, Panim at all quality, even in this physical world. As well as expressed in Torah is undiluted, suffering no blurring or distortion. But when it is expressed in this world, that will does suffer from tzimtzumim, so without intention you have an act which is totally God's will, but that fact is barely evident and manifest. That, in essence, is the Tanya's answer to our question, why it cannot rise and stand before God, but before clarifying the answer in detail, what would the world be without tzimtzumim? It wouldn't be physical. It would just be God's light. There wouldn't be a world. That is, in essence, the Tanya's answer to our question, why it cannot rise and stand before God. But before clarifying the answer in detail, Tanya will first digress slightly to compare Torah without kavanah to a case of non-sacred talk. So it's going to give an example. It's going to be an example. That's why I gave you examples. It's going to give you an example. Speaking words of Torah without intention is in no way comparable to speaking non-sacred words. Is in no way comparable to speaking non-sacred words devoid of Torah content or purpose, where the energizing animal soul does impose a hester and hide God's holiness. You can't compare Torah without intention to non-sacred talk. Non-sacred talk suffers from hester panim, and maybe I should back out here so we understand. Um, when you speak words that are coming completely from your animal soul, just meaningless chitter chatter, right? Okay. We're hiding God on two levels. Both there's a diminishment of God's light in quantity, and there is a filter on God's light. Okay. So what about when we study Torah? Do we have both of those filters? That's why he brought that in. He's trying to compare. When I speak with my animal soul, I say gossip or I speak meaningless words, both God's light is very contracted and very, very hidden. He says, but when we speak words of Torah, he says like this, even though there's no place devoid of God, and God is definitely present even in the Klippa energy, nevertheless, he is most hidden of all hidden and is called God that hides. And that is from Isaiah, a God that hides. So God can be here and he hides. So that's the answer. If anybody says, well, God is everywhere, yes, God is everywhere, but he can also hide. He's very good at it. And then he continues, this doesn't mean that God is totally hidden and can't be found at all in the world. It means that even the light and energy that flows from him into this world is hidden by numerous powerful filters and veils until that energy becomes enmeshed and hidden in the filter of Klipat Noga. While non-sacred words suffer from Hester Panim, sacred words of Torah do not. This is not the case with sacred letters of Torah and prayer that you speak, where not only is there no Klipa, but on the contrary, let's go to the next page. And if you're not familiar with the terms klipa, it's okay. That's not the main point here. The klipa noga zaka transformed to good and absorbed in the good, as mentioned above. Nevertheless, this is the point. He's trying to answer the question: how is it possible I do Torah without intention that it doesn't become one with God? The glimmer of God's holy light, which does shine in these words of Torah or prayers spoken without extent, suffers from symptom to the absolute extreme. What is the cause of the extreme symptom? Since in this case the light of Torah or prayer is not expressed in the heart and mind, but only in the organs of speech and voice, and its speech are physical. Symptom is particularly strong here because the mitzvah is taking place exclusively in the physical realm, which is not conducive to divine light. For as we learned earlier, that the light found in the purely physical realm, suffers from symptom to an absolute extreme. So, um, so I think I had it backwards actually. I think I had it backwards. So when you study Torah without intention, the fact that the Torah is the will of God is always there because it's Torah. That doesn't change. But how much of that can actually shine in this world, that becomes contracted. That becomes contracted because I'm studying it very much in purely the physical frame and the physical frame of mind. Therefore, it's stuck in the physical world, which is a place where God's light is very diminished. When I force my Torah to stay in the physical plane of this world, it becomes a much more diminished light. Now he's going to continue. But when prayer, because we want to finish this topic here, where it's not much longer, and so we go to the next topic next week. Now he continues. All the world to come does have tzimtzum, but not as much. But the Torah itself in Olam Abad does not have tzimtzum. Well, it does also, but really everything has tzimtzum. Just depends how much. But let me continue. But when prayer is carried out with concentration or Torah study with authentic intent, then the intention becomes enmeshed with the spoken letters. So if you studied with intention, then your intention becomes enmeshed with the spoken letters, and they can become elevated to a higher world. As within in chapter 38, intention is not merely an enhancement to divine will, right? In other words, like we said there, it's not just you think there's the mitzvah and there's the kavanah, and the kavanah enhances it. No, when you do a mitzvah with intention, it's much more than an enhancement. It's becomes a part and parcel of the mitzvah itself. We spoke at length of there was a very important point. The difference between words of prayer, which are physical, and kavanah intention is that kavanah intention is more suited to be a vehicle for expressions of divine light because there's a less hidden divine light there because it's not so physical. So while the physical words of prayer suffer from too much symptom contraction of God's light and will not shine with more than a minuscule degree of divine light, nevertheless, when they are enmeshed with the kavanah, with the intention, it's like a body receiving its soul, and even the physical words can shine with God's light. Because it's not only that kavanah is a vehicle on its own, because it's more spiritual. Intention is a more spiritual concept. It's a vehicle for spirituality, but the kavanah becomes so enmeshed with your deed, just like a soul becomes enmeshed with the body, that the mitzvah itself becomes elevated. So basically, if I want my Torah mitzvahs to have less contraction of God's divine light, the fact that they are God's will is never hidden. Okay, you cannot hide God in there. But the fact that, but the amount of God's light that shines can be diminished. But through intention becomes a vehicle for the divine light to be revealed in it. It's a very simple point. Is if I have intention, and God's divine light is shining it. That's the reason why I'm doing it. That's the divine light. And this merging the divine light, the kavanah, and the physical act of speaking Torah or prayer is possible since intention is the source and the root of this prayer Torah study. Because it's the direct cause and the reason which led to the speaking of these prayer or Torah study. This goes back to a point that we said earlier. We said, kavanah does not just mean I know the meaning of my prayer. It has to be the reason why I'm making the prayer. It has to be the reason why I'm doing the mitzvah. Because only then does it really become enmeshed with the mitzvah. Okay? Because since it's the root of the mitzvah, then it's enmeshed. In other words, understanding what the mitzvah is not the reason why I'm doing it. And therefore, they're not fully merged. But if the whole reason why I'm doing the mitzvah is because of my love and awe of God, that is actually the source behind it, then automatically, if it's vivifying it, it can become one with it. Then he continues. Um, Therefore, since the holy intent merges with the speech and becomes enmeshed with it, the intent raises the physical word spoken to its higher plane. And what is that higher plane? That higher plane is the 10 sfirot of Yetzirah. The 10 sfirot of Yetzirah. Want to make sure I'm going to the right place. 10 sfirot of Yetzirah. I'm wondering if I should stop here because I just glossed over this very important point, but it is an important point, and I'm thinking that maybe this is too long. Yeah, okay. So we will pick that up next week. But that point is going to be, and we'll pick it up again next week, is that point is going to be this very important point that the Tanya has brought time and time again, which is again revolutionary, that kavanah is not what we generally think it is. In other words, if I pray fully understanding what I'm saying, because someone told me I should understand what I'm saying, but the reason why I'm praying is still because I do it every day or because I'm trying to learn the meaning of the prayers, and I'm not praying because I want to feel connected to God, because I want to connect with God. If that's not my intention, then the mitzvah has not left this world because it was not about connecting with God. As much as I understood the prayer itself, as much as I understood the mitzvah itself. And so that's why it's so important to have kavanah. That's why it's such an important wrap up of the conversation. That's why I want to get back to it. I want to get back to it next week because it's an important point again, where the Tanya stresses multiple times. It's a very revolutionary idea of the Tanya. I want to end off with a story. Just want to end off with a story. The story goes like this. The story goes like this. There's one time there's one time a man who came to his rabbi and he said, Rabbi, this is a true story. He says, um, I did a tinus dibur. It says if you don't talk gossip or any wasteful speech for 40 days, you will merit to see Elijah the prophet, or you'll merit for divine inspiration, Ruach HaKodesh, the divine spirit. So he comes to his rabbi, and he says, I tried it for 40 days, and I did not merit the revelation of Elijah. I didn't merit the divine spirit. So his rabbi tells him, come with me. So they go outside, and they walk over to the barn, and the Rebbe starts petting the horse. Good horse, beautiful horse, amazing horse. The guy says, why are you petting the horse? He says, listen, the rabbi says, listen, this horse, he also didn't say anything wrong for 40 days. In other words, it's not just about what we don't do. In other words, we can do many good deeds, we can do many mitzvahs, and we can still be a horse. That's the point. It's a lot more complex than just doing the right thing. And when we're talking about wanting to connect to God, if we want to become more spiritual, which is the quest of someone who's studying Tanya. If you weren't interested in spirituality, you wouldn't pick up Tanya, right? You just keep doing the mitzvahs. We pick up the Tanya because we want spirituality. Well, if we want spirituality, just doing the deeds alone is not enough. We need to do mitzvahs with intention and with a desire to connect to God with feelings of love and awe of Him. And I will end with that story for today.